Socrates has only just begun his radical quest when he says that the happy life, the flourishing life, is the virtuous life, because he charges on from there, because now we have to ask ourselves what he thinks virtue is. And this is where he really branches off, because his answer is that virtue is knowledge. It is, in some sense, which we'll come on to in a moment, knowledge of the human good. And as we've seen, that if you don't have knowledge of the human good, then no other apparent goods that you possess, such as health or wealth, can do you any good. Now, then he says, well, in fact, each individual virtue, such as temperance or justice or courage, is in fact united as one, as knowledge of the human good. And there's a very keen philosophical debate that still goes on about exactly what Socrates means by this thesis of the unity of virtue. Does he simply mean that all the individual virtues are interdependent, you can't have one without them all, or does he mean something stronger, that all the virtues, all the individual virtues are in fact one thing, this one thing that's knowledge? Now, of course, the counter of that, if virtue is knowledge, then we get to possibly his most radical claim of all, which is that vice is ignorance. It is simply ignorance. And he says that no one does wrong willingly, which I think will still surprise some of our listeners. And the weakness of the will is impossible. There can be no such thing as a conflict of desires. All you need to do is find out what the best thing for you as a human being is, and then if you know what that is, you couldn't fail to do it.
What is the best thing for you as a human being, you think, is to go and kill a lot of people?
Then that shows that you've not understood, Socrates would say, how precious your soul is to you. Right. He's not actually anti-war in Plato.
Yeah,
he thinks
he had a
he goes.
war career. Yeah.
He does. He fights at Delium and Potidaea and so on.
David Sedley.
But you don't do it for revenge. That's the point.
That's right. Exactly right. Socrates' insistence that if you knew enough, you would always do the right thing, in itself sounds terribly implausible. There's so many obvious counterexamples to it of knowing you shouldn't smoke this cigarette, but you give in, weakness of will prevails. But I think the reason why Socrates had such a powerful case was that the way he lived his own life seemed to prove it true. Socrates was quite extraordinary for his own power of mind over matter. There were legendary tales of his courage, his fortitude, going barefoot in winter, putting up with all kinds of dangers, his total calm in the face of his impending death. It really seemed to people that Socrates had a level of understanding which did enable him always to do the right thing without any kind of conflict from his emotions.
Paul, can we get a bit more context here? The 5th century BC, we talked about it, mentioned it's a golden age.